Good morning.
Welcome. Welcome to this Vermilion Talent webinar series. This is our first webinar and we're very excited to launch this webinar series. Cheryl is our first guest, so we're very proud of having you here. Today we're going to talk about decision making, everything about decision making and career re-entry, how that relates to each other. I think within career re-entry there are a lot of decisions to be made, so we're very excited to have you here and to be able to hear your experience and to help us with these questions and these decisions that we need to make.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. So thank you all for participating in this webinar. We know you're all busy bees. You should be proud of yourself to be here, and you should be proud of yourself that you take this time to out of your day to join this webinar. I want to ask you, before we start actually, to really use this time for yourself. So see this as a little bit of a me time. You took the time to register for this webinar and also to listen to this webinar. So please turn off your phones, turn off your social media, turn off anything that will distract you, and make sure that you get everything out of this webinar as much as possible. Just some logistics. So at the end of this webinar, we will have enough time to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button on the tool, on the Zoom tool that you're using. It's easily available. You will see Q&A somewhere, and you can type in your question. We have Anju sitting here who will prompt us with the questions, and we will ask Cheryl all these questions that you have. If there's any problem with audio, we know technology is always a bit tricky with webinars. We're a bit nervous about that as well, this being our first webinar. If there's anything related to audio, please also send a quick chat or a Q&A or raise your hand within the Zoom tool, and we will try to solve that as soon as possible. That being said, let's go to the introductions, and let's properly introduce. Anju is my business partner of Vermilion Talent. For people who are new to Vermilion Talent and who are new to this webinar series, Vermilion Talent is all about helping you to get back in the workforce or transition to the right career. So figuring out what you want to do, helping you to get there, to get that job that you're looking for. Again, decision making is a big part of this whole journey. Anju is my business partner. She is a management consultant, has a management consulting background. She was out from the workforce for a couple of years also to take care of her kids. So she went through this process herself. And that's the great thing of having Anju as a co-founder of Vermilion Talent, since she can share all her experiences with you, and we do that actually on a daily basis to our members. So, well, Anju is here again to do Q&A and is present but will not be in the screen. Then myself, I'm Barbara Lemmens. I'm the other co-founder of Vermilion Talent. My background is that I relocated actually from the Netherlands to the US, and that's how I got back in. So I bring in 1 second, because there's one, he says webinar is expired. So there's something going on with the webinar, I think. Madhu says this. So I bring in a different perspective, relocating from the Netherlands and having to, needing to get a new job here. So I had that gap, and also a lot of challenges I went through, and I was able to get back in. So I bring that perspective to the table, and that's what we're at Vermilion Talent all about. And then we have Cheryl here. I will introduce Cheryl briefly. You sent this impressive bio to me, and I actually need to read it because there's a lot on there, if you don't mind. You're the creator of the AREA method, and we will talk a lot about this method during this webinar. The method is a decision-making system for individuals and companies to solve complex problems. And I think in the meantime, so you wrote a book. I think you've helped a lot of people making these complex decisions, right? Cheryl is the founder of CSE Consulting and the author of the book Problem Solved that we will talk about today. You're teaching as an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School, and you have won several journalism Journalism Awards for your investigative stories. Maybe if we have time left, we can hear a bit about that as well, because it's very, very interesting as well. Okay, so before we start, we would like to do a poll with you. This will help us to figure out who our audience is, what type of decision makers we have in the room. We have joining us via our webinar. So we're launching our poll now, and the question is, what type of decision maker are you? And if you can, please answer the question, put in one answer in the question that we ask. So it's either A, I follow my gut and I make decisions quickly. B, I have a structured approach and I make fact-based choices and plan carefully. Or C, I'd rather make no decisions. If you can please put in your answer, and then we will actually launch the results of the poll in a minute. Can you please, we didn't get any answers yet, but can you, or we actually got some, but can you please, all of you try to put the answer in so we can have a great idea of who is joining us. Give you 10 more seconds and then we will launch the results. Okay. Let's launch the results. So what do we have here? So we have most of the attendees say they have a structured approach and make fact-based choices. And we have also follow my gut and make decisions quickly. So can you talk a bit about this answer, or what is the...
So first I want to say thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm delighted to speak with you, and it's so nice of each of you to take time out of your day to think about your career path and what you think would be meaningful to you. So I think what we see here is that, you know, there's no one right way to make decisions. I think that's really comforting. And I think some people do really feel like they have an instinctual response that is comfortable to them and that they trust. What we're going to talk about today a little bit is how to have even greater awareness about how we engage with our gut, and whether or not we want to listen to it. Yeah. Right? Yeah. How are the assumptions that we're making that our gut is driving us towards, how do they actually match up when we have evidence to support them? I think it's terrific that nobody said that they don't want to make decisions. Exactly. Because researchers tell us that actually we're making about 40,000 in any given day. Wow. Everything from what side of the bed to get up on in the morning to what late night snack and what we're going to have for that snack. And so the truth is that we really do need what we call gut reactions. We need those well-worn mental pathways that tell us how to do what we need to do in a way that doesn't take up a lot of thinking time and doesn't really slow us down. Yeah. So that we don't get choice fatigue. But the truth is when we're solving for complex problems, we actually need a way to pry open cognitive space to allow for new information and new insight.
Yeah, and to take that step back, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we would like to start with giving you a bit more time to introduce yourself. Again, career reentry is all about decision making. Your background is writer, journalist. How did you make that almost switch, or how did you come up with this decision making method while you were a writer or journalist?
Well, the truth is actually I put this together in part to do a more ethical job at work. I was a reporter at Barron's, the business magazine, for a decade, and I sort of ended up specializing in what you might call the bearish company story. Those are the stories that take a skeptical look at a company's strategy or at its financials. And when those stories would come out, oftentimes there'd be a very large share price reaction. Sometimes regulators would halt the stock, or the criminal justice department would get involved. And so I really started to think about these stories are having a big impact, not just on somebody's investment portfolio, but on somebody's retirement account, on somebody's ability to actually work for these companies where I was writing investigative pieces, or even your ability as a consumer to buy the products and services from them. And so I really started to think about how could I have greater confidence and conviction in my own decision making? How could I better understand the incentives and motives of the sources who came to me with those stories? And as a middle class kid from outside of Boston, how could I have a greater awareness to my own assumptions and judgments? How could I know that I was actually coming to the right conclusions? I realized that it's hubris to say, I'm going to be objective now and look at a data set and think that I'm being objective. Mm-hmm. And so what I started to really think about is there a way that I could go all in on the idea that we are flawed thinkers, that we do have these shortcuts? And given my background in research, could I set up a construct that would enable me to not only control for, but also counteract some of these mental mistakes, while also making sure that I recognize that we all operate in a rich stakeholder environment. None of our decisions are purely just about us. Mm-hmm. If we want to solve our problems holistically, we need to be able to understand the incentives and motives of the other stakeholders involved in those decisions so that we can really have a good opportunity to make decisions that have a good chance of succeeding.
Yeah.
So that's how I initially got to the process.
Very interesting. So I think we get to the meat of the conversation already. The whole book, or the method that you put together, is the area method. I've read the book myself. I would really recommend actually to read the book, because it's great. It gave me a different view on those decisions, even the small decisions that you make on the day, right? It's really, okay, is this something that I need to take a step back for? But I would love to ask you to describe what this method is, because I think most of our listeners haven't read your book yet.
So AREA, it's called the AREA method, is an acronym for the steps of my perspective taking process. When I was really thinking about how could we walk in the footsteps of other people, and how could we also have a better understanding of our assumptions and judgments, I settled on this idea of perspective taking. And perspective taking really gives you a beautiful 2-for-1. By segregating information in part based upon its source, by stepping into the footsteps of the other stakeholders involved in our decisions, not only are we better able to understand their behavior, their incentives and motives, but we're also able to get this beautiful mirroring effect. It gives us this 2-for-1. As we're learning about other people and how they think and feel, we're also able to gain distance on ourselves, and that can help us to bubble up those assumptions and judgments. And so AREA stands for the 4 different parts of the process, and we can go on to the next slide, which is a bit of what I call a cheetah sheet. And we'll discuss why the cheetah in just a few minutes, but this is basically a 1-pager that gives you a breakdown of the process. So A, absolute information is from close up on the target of your decision. Think of it as primary source information almost. R, relative information, is the next concentric circle of information. Mm-hmm. It's sources that are somehow connected to the target of your decision. E is actually what I consider the twin engines of creativity. Exploration is about getting beyond document-based sources so that you identify good people to talk to who have knowledge about your decision, and you ask them great questions. AREA exploitation is about depth, and that's where we turn our lens inward on ourselves as decision makers so that we can test out our assumptions against our evidence, in part through a series of exercises that I've learned from other experts in fields like journalism, in medicine, and in intelligence gathering. And then the final A, analysis, puts the whole process back together. And so this is just a 1-pager of some sample steps that you would do at each part of the process. And the underlying premise is that many people find facing down a complex problem a little bit frustrating and uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Where do you start? Where do you look for information? And so AREA basically says, don't worry about that. Let's invert the problem and instead ask yourself something that I think is far more empowering, which is what constitutes a good outcome for you personally? So even though you may not know how to solve your problem, you probably can identify what needs to happen in the outcome of the decision for you to know that that decision has been successful. Well, now you're no longer looking at an open-ended research project. Right now you're deeply and creatively investigating only those few factors that are going to get you to your vision of success.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you make, because that's also what we ask our community, the women that we meet, is okay, how would your ideal role or your target role look like? I think that's makes the problem solving almost, or like the getting clarity, it makes it already so much easier if you just open end and say, I want to get back to work, but I have no clue what.
I think that's right, but it's not just what would it look like. I think that's still very difficult. It's actually further down the road than that. It is, what do you need to see happen after you've made that decision to know that the decision is successful?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that is actually now helping you to derive what I call your critical concepts, which are the 1, 2, or 3 things that have to happen in the outcome so that you know that the decision has succeeded.
Yeah.
And then again, it's only those few things now that you really need to deeply and creatively investigate so that you are researching and deciding on what you know is your vision of success.
Yeah. So is that even then, I just want to bring it back towards career entry, towards our audience, is that really then the success after having that job that they're looking for, like after that transition that they made?
That's right.
How
So
would that look
we're
like,
going to go through an example in just a couple of slides, but if you just pause here for 1 second and then you think about, okay, so let's say you're deciding to go back to work and you realize that you want to do something, let's say, in marketing.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just in your vision of success that you're actually doing something that relates to marketing. It's that, and critical concepts are individual to each person. So if you and I were each making the same decision, what may be most important to us in the outcome could be different.
Yeah.
We might have a different time horizon. We might have a different risk tolerance. We might need to earn a different amount of money to make that successful. But let's say then for an individual, just for an example, that it would mean that they have time to actually spend 2 afternoons a week just with the kids.
Yeah.
Right? It might mean that they are able to work 10 hours a week. It might mean that they don't have to have a long commute. Those 3 things might all be critical concepts for a particular person. So it's not just about the job itself, because again, we all operate in this rich stakeholder environment, and for our decisions to succeed, we need to understand that we have to solve them with a collaborative backbone in a way that addresses them holistically.
And to see the full spectrum of the consequences even of making a decision. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. So I would like to go, and this is a very nice picture, I think, of you and your kids, right? So, and the question also relates to your personal life. Like, how has this method or way of thinking benefited you in your personal life? Like,
So this is a picture of my oldest daughter's 20th birthday just a couple of weeks ago. And this methodology has really turned out to be the operating system of my life. It's not just a way that I'm making decisions, but it's a way that I'm showing up for other people. And I used to be every day on television on CNBC, and at the same time I was also writing for Barron's. And Barron's is located all the way in Lower Manhattan. It was an 1.5-hour commute each way. Yes. And then I also had to do these television spots and get to a place that actually had the TV signal that CNBC needed. And so when I decided that I was going to leave Barron's and do something else, what I wanted to do is sit down and say, well, what are what are the different perspectives that I need to take into account in terms of being able to care for my family, just like we were talking about in the example a minute ago, how to be able to care for my family and be a participatory mom, how to do something that's going to be intellectually challenging and rigorous and that I find meaningful to me as an individual, and then also something that is going to be able to grow over time. I didn't want something where I again was going to need to make a next transition. So I sat down and I really was able to use my methodology to map out how I was going to go about investigating the different possibilities for what I was going to do next. With the current skill set that I had, and also new skills that I thought I wanted to add over time, so that I could be, as we all are, in many worlds, right? In the world of our family, in the world that we are as adults, in the world that we want to operate as friends, daughters, etc.
It's amazing how many roles we play, right, in life. Great. Well, that is so. It actually helped you definitely in your personal life as well, which is a great.
It's been a guiding tool for me. And I feel extremely fortunate that I was so worried about my stories that I sat down and actually spent time thinking about it. It's been really transformational.
Great.
And unexpected.
Well, great. Great. So we have a nice picture here of the cheetah, which is, I think, is an amazing animal, right? And I actually learned about something more amazing that I didn't even know about the cheetah because I read your book. So can you talk a little bit more about this cheetah plot?
So one of the parts of the value proposition of how the area method updates the research and pedagogy related to decision making is that I build strategic stops in all along the process, right? We're all in a rush nowadays. We feel compelled to answer text messages and emails at all hours of the day. But when you're solving for an important and uncertain future, your own, you deserve time for thoughtful reflection. And so what I do is all along the process of the area method is I build in these strategic stops, and I call them cheetah pauses. So why the cheetah? The cheetah's prodigious hunting skill is not its ability to accelerate like a race car. It's actually that it can decelerate up to 9 miles an hour in a single stride.
Amazing.
And in hunting, that's far more important than accelerating like a race car, because now you're talking about agility, flexibility, maneuverability, all the things that a good research and decision-making system needs to be. So everywhere that I tell you to take a strategic stop, I have a cheetah sheet. Think of them as the graphic organizers of the area method, and they give you tips on either where to look for information based on where you are in the process, or what kind of analysis you want to be doing at that point, so that research is broken down, because it's an umbrella term for actually a series of whole tricky steps that need to be thoughtfully and carefully navigated. So I'm holding your hand all along the process to tell you where to look for information or what kind of analysis to do so that you can chunk your learning and make your work for you.
Great. That is great. So we want to get back to another poll actually before we go ahead. I think there's a lot being said already, but we want to again learn a bit more about you as well, and be able to use that in the rest of our conversation as well. So we would like to launch the poll now. Are we launching the poll?
Yes, we are.
Question 2. So the poll, the question that we want to ask you is, what decision is top of mind for you? We know that most of the professionals who join us for this webinar, or join us to look at our website, or connect with us, are looking to get back to work or to transition their career. So they're on a decision modus. So the decision now is for the audience, is the decision that is top of mind for you is that, should I go back to work? What should I do in the next chapter of my career, or other? So we're just having a technical thing here. So launch, well, and then we can So the poll will be launched now. We would love to hear from you what it is that that's on top of mind for you. And like I said, it's go back to work or next chapter of my career or other. It can be, I mean, this decision-making method is interesting for other people as well, right? So we're interested to see who is on. Okay, so we're launching the results now, and I think the majority of our listeners say, what should I do in the next chapter of my career? So it seems like that we have a lot of more transitioners on in the webinar, so probably professionals who are maybe currently working or really thinking of making a switch in their career. So that's an interesting outcome. Do you want to say something about the outcome?
Well, one of the things that I think is so wonderful in modern life is that we do get this possibility now to continually sort of reinvigorate who we are and how we grow intellectually. And when I was thinking about my transition out of Barron's, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and of course this is just one person's personal story, what I realized is that investigative journalism really sort of celebrates going for the jugular. Those negative stories that come out that cause a big reaction, that was a muscle that I didn't want to keep building. You know, what I wanted to be doing was thinking more about harmony and sort of helping people get along better and having positive relationships. So if you think about that, right, that's really what is consistent with my values. And as you're thinking about what your skill sets are and what you want to do in the next chapter of your career, I know for myself that it enabled me to sort of think about my skill set in a completely different way by starting with something that was really an overlay for what kind of life I wanted to be engaging with, right? I was good at writing those kind of stories, and they were really celebrated in the newsroom, but I wasn't just operating in the newsroom. I realized that I was bringing the ability to ask the inappropriate question into my friendships, into my home, and that was a muscle, just like empathy is a muscle. So as you're thinking about what you want to do next, I know for me, I thought it was very valuable to really take that cheetah pause and say, what constitutes a good outcome for me personally? How do I want to show up?
Yeah, and I think that's really reflects also what we're advising when we're talking again with professionals that we connect with is take that step back and make a list of what you enjoy most in life, and that can be something in your professional life but also your personal life. And as soon as you have that list, maybe go to friends and family and ask what they think that you are good at, right? What are your best, what are the skills that you have, and then you will come up with maybe a list that's maybe a bit different than when you started, or primarily thinking about, okay, I was a finance person and I actually can do a lot of accounting very well, right? There's so much more that you can.
Look, I think also it's really lovely to try to identify somebody who knows you as a decision maker, so that they know whether or not you are the type of person who feels comfortable with your gut. Maybe you're somebody who really does like to be a listener and ask a lot of different people. You want to choose somebody who's also going to hold you accountable, somebody who's going to push back on you a little. So just going to friends and family, some of those will well be people who will hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a mother like I do.
Yeah.
And I love her dearly, in part because of that. But you don't just want to ask people who you know really are going to support you and mirror back what you're saying and thinking. You do want somebody who's going to help hold you accountable for how you make decisions.
Yeah, so even maybe somebody not that close to you could even actually be a great feedback giver.
Right, so really thinking about what's your opportunity set in terms of the type of people that you could reach out to.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now we get to the connection between the area method and career re-entry decision. And I know we talked a bit about it already. But can you maybe elaborate a little bit more about how the relationship between the area method and career reentry?
So if you just begin thinking about what are the various perspectives of information that you're going to want to be examining, right? So right away, decision making about reentry is really a lot of different decisions, right? It's what are your personal needs? What are your family's needs? What kind of workplace vacancies are there, right? I mean, you could decide that you want a particular kind of job, but right now that's not a field that's growing very much. And so you would want to be able to look from the various perspectives so that you could really understand how do those units think of themselves and their what drives their behavior. So if you're thinking about your family and your family is saying to you, we don't really want you to go back to work, but we don't really want you to be transitioning to a new career because what you're doing now works for us, that may not be exactly how they feel. What they may be telling you when you look at their incentives, right, is that they love you and they want to spend time with you. Maybe they're hoping that this change is not really going to change your relationship with them or the amount of time that you are with them. And so really being able to understand the incentives and motives of these different groups is going to be able to help you better think about what is going to help solve that problem holistically.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've touched upon this career entry topic. We were thinking of doing a case study, but maybe in view of time, we leave that. And if we still have time at the end, we will go through the case study. Let's do that. Okay, so maybe do you want to talk a little bit more about the different perspectives? I mean, you have talked about.
So, right, let's say you're starting in the absolute phase. Right, in the absolute phase, you're close up on the target. Since most of you tended to answer that you wanted to transition your career, right, your absolute phase might be thinking about the different types of career opportunities that could use your skill sets, right? So if you are in a job where you're doing a lot of writing, and you don't think that journalism is really working out for you, if that's where you were, maybe now you're thinking about fields such as public relations or marketing, or maybe even a more specific kind of writing, like a technical writing, where you're helping out with manuals and other kinds of scientific writing. And so maybe those are what we would call your absolute targets, right? And target can be several. If you have several options, it could be binary, if it's a binary set of options that you are looking at. And then one example of what you would do in absolute, thinking back to the cheetah sheet that you saw earlier, is that you really want to start with the numbers. So you'd look at the least influenced parts of information that you could get from those targets. So maybe you look at what the vacancies are and what the growth in the fields are for marketing, for public relations, for scientific writing. And then you might also think about what are some of the employers that tend to have those openings and how do they match up with where you are looking. In relative, when you're looking in the next concentric circle of information, you then would get beyond just the individual opportunities and you'd look at putting it into a broader context. What do industry experts have to say about these fields? What sort of things do people who work within those fields have to say about it? What have their experiences been? Then in exploration, you'll be identifying the right people to talk to and asking them great questions. So for instance, the type of people, once you get beyond document-based sources, might be people who are currently in those jobs, people who have formerly been in those jobs, people who can help you understand what an actual day is like, what is the environment like that you are working in. In exploitation, you'd be thinking about your assumptions against your evidence. You might, for instance, conduct a scenario analysis where you say, okay, what is the upside case of working in these different types of opportunities? What is the downside case? And then what would be, let's say, a most realistic case? In a scenario analysis, what you're trying to figure out is really what are the degree of the possibilities, so that you can really see for yourself, what would it look like if everything went well? What would it look like if everything went wrong?
Worst case scenario.
And then think about what is most realistic. Then in the analysis phase, when you're really close to making your decision, having some final checks on where you might have made mistakes, doing an exercise like a pre-mortem, which is the opposite of the post-mortem. The post-mortem is something that doctors use, and the joke is that everybody benefits but the patient. It's generally when the autopsy is done to figure out why the patient died. Here, what you would be doing is you would be imagining that your decision has failed, even before you've started it. And you'd be telling the story of that failure so that you could think about how might things go awry, and then you can also construct how you may be able to prevent those types of problems from actually occurring before you even come to conviction, so that by the time you've made your decision, you've not only thought through what you think would work best for you, but you've also been able to pinpoint what would be markers that the decision isn't actually going the way that I had hoped, and constructing safeguards to prevent that kind of failure.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing method that is very, very usable for our audience. And I also see a lot of parallels with sort of the process or the journey that we offer to our audience. So I think it's amazing how much parallel we have actually. Yeah. So thank you for that explanation. I think that was very, very great. I think the next slide that we show you now, this is all about biases, and that's I found that very interesting when I read about that, because I recognized a lot of those biases for myself. So can you talk, and we actually talked when we prepared for this, we thought, okay, those 3 biases might make sense most for our audience that occur, right?
So the area method is really the first system that tries to control for and counteract these mental mistakes, these kinds of biases that we all tend to come to the world with. And these are just 3 ones that are very popular. Social proof is sort of going along with what other people have already done or how they've thought and felt. And the truth is just because other people have done it doesn't mean that it's right for us. The planning fallacy is something that unfortunately is one that I deal with a lot, which is that even though we've done a task before, oftentimes we tend to underestimate how much time that same task is going to take us. And so it has to do with really thinking about time allocation and being both effective and efficient. And then the narrative bias is just this idea that we tend to really like stories, right? Stories make things make sense to us. And that doesn't mean, though, that the story is actually accurate. And so what the area method tries to do is really marry the social performance side of human behavior, these incentives and motives, these biases and judgments, with the evaluation and metric part of decision making, so that we have an opportunity to really say, when something like narrative bias comes up, is there evidence to support those assumptions? Should I really be paying attention to it just because it seems like the story makes sense?
Yeah. Thank you. So there is also part of self-assessment, right, that you include in the method. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So that is the exploitation part of the methodology, where I have this series of exercises that I learned from these other disciplines like intelligence gathering, medicine, and investigative journalism. And they really try to hold us accountable as decision makers, so that we have to face down our assumptions and we have to think about what evidence we have. I discussed very briefly the scenario analysis, but there's some other wonderful tips and techniques that people can use. In the book, I go through 4 high-stakes decisions, 2 personal high-stakes decisions, and 2 professional ones, so that you can really hopefully see how you might be able to apply the methodology yourself. And although I show these exercises together and they do integrate and build upon one another, just like the cheetah, the methodology has to work for where you are personally in your life. It has to be adaptable and malleable for the time allocation that you have in order to make your decision. And so I talk about a competing alternative hypothesis exercise, which is a fancy title for basically saying that you might consider an exercise where you really sort of think about what are all the different hypotheses that I have for how the problem could solve, and then how do I think about the key pieces of evidence that I have in their diagnosticity. Because the truth is that the hypothesis that has the most confirming data is not necessarily the hypothesis that's going to be successful. You can have a lot of confirming pieces of data, but if you have one insurmountable hurdle, that hypothesis isn't going to play out. So actually the most likely hypothesis is actually the one with the least disconfirming data. And I find that although people are resistant sometimes to put pen to paper or to type it out onto a computer screen, writing is actually thinking. And when we sit down and do these exercises, I almost always hear from people that they have encountered a real aha moment. Something that either really changes the way that they understand their problem, but also something that can drive them back into earlier parts of the process to either look for new information or to conduct new analysis.
Okay. I want to go over skip the next slide, but I want to talk, I think, a little bit more about confidence. Because confidence is definitely a key word, a key feeling that many of our professionals that we work with maybe struggle a bit with. Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about confidence and the relation to your method or to your book?
So I think that one of the things is that many people struggle with is their confidence relating to decision making, especially as it relates to high stakes decision. And so I had talked just a few minutes ago about marrying this social performance side of human behavior with the evaluation and metric part of decision making. And the basic idea is that you are constantly verifying the information you have. You're verifying it in thinking about the incentives and motives of others, and by thinking about your assumptions against your evidence, so that you have an ability to really feel like you are constantly having an opportunity to build your own truth meter, right? Are you really understanding the facts as they are, not as you would like them to be, because we'd all like them to be a certain way. And our brains want it to be that way because that's comfortable. Right? And so what we want to do is have this opportunity to consistently challenge ourselves so that we're strengthening our relationships by building this collaborative backbone, by recognizing that we operate in a rich stakeholder environment, and we're constantly asking ourselves to think about whether or not we then have evidence to match up against our assumptions.
Okay, so do we have Q&A, a lot of Q&A? Do one more poll? Yeah. Okay, so we will do one more poll. We want to know a little bit, one more time, a little bit more about you. So the question is, what is stopping you from moving forward? That's, I think, a good question to answer and to think about as well. So we will give you a little bit of time to think about it and to give you, put your answer in. And then we will look at it and look at the results. It also tells a bit more about what phase our audience is in from a career entry perspective. So are they really in the beginning of thinking to get back in, but yeah, like really just starting, or maybe they have been thinking about it a little bit more already, but struggling with the decision on what should I do, right? So it's really the clarity phase, and then after that you actually get the whole preparation of getting out there and applying. So we're launching the results now, and we see that's actually you answered can't decide what I should do. So I think our audience is definitely already further along than just thinking, should I actually go back to work? And interesting to see that the answer is also, I'm afraid of getting a job and changing the dynamics of my life and family. I think that as well, we talked a lot about it already a bit.
Look, I think it's very real, and I think oftentimes people feel very immobilized by that, right? Because they don't know what the change is going to bring. Their family doesn't know, and that's why I was talking before about probing beyond just the first answer that you get when you're talking to your family, right? Because what you really want to understand from them is an understanding of what they are really concerned about, right? And so having an opportunity to have a frank conversation with them to understand their incentives and their motives can give you a better sense of what kind of change in the dynamic are they worried about. Is it what you thought it was or not? And again, this is this idea of constant verification, of testing your assumptions against your evidence.
Great. So I think I want to go also again in view of time. We can talk about this forever, I feel, which is great. I mean, I would love to go through everything, but we just have not enough time. So I think one of the questions that that I would love to ask you, and I think that's maybe the last one before we go to Q&A, is why do we actually need a method and why, what's wrong with just following my gut feeling?
Well, I think most people want an opportunity to be able to know how good's my gut, right? We should get to have an opportunity to react to our gut and to decide mindfully how we engage with it. And that's why I think that a process like the area method that focuses on perspective taking, that is meant to address and counteract our cognitive biases, is something that allows us to really know when and how we want to rely on our gut. And actually on the homepage of my website, which is areamethod.com, I have something that is a web-based app that can help you learn about your default decision maker archetype. I call it the problem solver profile, and it's free. If you just go on to areamethod.com, you'll see that it says it right on top of the website, and you can just click the orange button that says problem solver profile, make big decisions better. And then what you can do is you can take the quiz questions that I have at the beginning, and then at the end you can receive a template that will tell you what kind of a default decision maker are you. And I say default because we're inconsistent decision makers in different parts of our life, or with different time constraints, or when we're with different groups of friends, we may make the same decision differently. And so knowing what our default is very useful for enabling us to decide how we want to engage with that. So once you've gone through the quiz questions, I provide you with a template that not only tells you about your default decision maker archetype, your problem solver profile, but it also tells you a little bit about being the strengths of being that kind of an archetype, and then a little bit also about the potential pitfalls, some of the main cognitive biases that kind of an archetype may be most prone to, and so you'd like to have heightened awareness about. And then just a sentence or two about a famous historical figure and why he or she fits into that type of an archetype. Because we want to have an opportunity to mindfully engage with the way that we tend to have our gut reactions.
And I think it's even interesting, like you said, right? In each phase of life, probably we are different default decision makers. So it's actually, maybe you did that already, but even test that out. Like I just gave birth to my third child, so I'm wondering if I make now different decisions than like a year ago, even, right? Hormones, I think, do a lot also to decision making.
Sleep deprivation.
Sleep, definitely, yeah. So it would be an interesting test, maybe to. Well, maybe you did that already, but it's yeah. So I think we're at the end of the webinar from a presentation perspective. We would like to open it up to you to ask any question that you have via the tool. would you like to share one more thought to the audience besides the answers to the questions? But do you want to share anything on your?
Look, I would say that we don't formally learn decision making in our homes for most of us, and we don't learn it in school. But if we could ever truly master a decision-making system, we could all lead more meaningful lives. And the truth is that there's two kinds of learning, right? There's knowledge and there's skill. And what I like about the area method is that it's a skill. I can teach it to you, and it can become yours, and you can decide how to use it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's ending words from you. So I would also like to, so first of all, of course, all buy the book. We have the book here. I'll just also show it to you. But I think it's really, really worth reading. And well, thank you very much for explaining a bit more about the book. I would also like to talk a little bit or tell you a little bit about Vermilion Talent if you're new to our organization. We think it's just time to catch up now with you. You know what we're all about. It's about career re-entry. It's about career transition, and we would like to help you to make that right decision and to along the way to get that job that you're looking for. So connect with us. We will be ready to have a one-on-one conversation with you to get the journey started. Put a game plan together, one-on-one, really a personalized game plan, and that's where we can help and start to help you. Yeah, so we are opening up for questions. I think we at least got one question that I would like to, because also view of time, I think we can do a couple of questions, but I want to start with one that I will read to you, and if you could give an answer to the question. So we have here somebody who asked, when my husband and I decided that I would stay home with our kids, my decision process to stay home was not comprehensive. I definitely thought through the benefits to my family, but didn't factor in the impact on my career. What could I have done differently?
Look, I do think that it's a very hard decision for people. Because when that moment comes when things are just not working, and as most of us know, there are often times where everybody's out of sync and it just doesn't seem to be working, sometimes it can seem easier to just completely stop. For me, when I was reaching that moment, as we were talking about, and I was an hour and a half away each direction, and I had 3 kids, and they each had their own personal schedule. It did seem like a very busy moment in time. But I think really stopping to say what makes me tick as a person, what would constitute success for me, I think is actually a really nice place to start, because you know that in asking yourself that question, that you're not answering it purely for yourself. You are asking it for what would make sense for your family or for the way that you live your life and your friendships. And so you'd have an opportunity to then think about, I enjoy having quality time with my family. I enjoy my own intellectual stimulation. I enjoy the opportunity to get together with friends. And I also like the fact that I'm not overprogrammed, for instance. That might be somebody's critical concepts, those few things that actually they would need to see happen in the outcome of the decision to know that it succeeded. Sometimes the answer to those things might be that you need a stop, that everything has really gotten to the point where you just need some time away from it all, but at least giving yourself the opportunity to answer those questions thoughtfully can really prevent you from just the gut reaction that it must be a complete break.
Yeah.
Because while that certainly is right for some people, it may not be right for you. And if you haven't had a chance to take that cheetah pause and to ask yourself what constitutes success, then you're not really giving yourself a chance to even begin to solve that problem. You're staying with that block, and you want to be able to get beyond that block, because you don't have to solve the problem at the outset. You just need to be able to identify what constitutes success for you personally.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great, probably also great advice for the phase that this person is now in, right? To make a decision, maybe to get back in, use this decision method to get back in. And what we also always tell our audience is, be proud of the decision that you made, actually. So you made that decision maybe at that point, maybe more the gut feeling method. But you probably have enjoyed the time to be with your family. So be proud of making that decision, and think back of it, of a great time, and being able to be with your kids at home. And now you're in the next phase of your career, so now you can make that next decision based on the phase that you're in now. I think we have time for one more question. And I think I just want to make sure we're using one that we can actually reflect on. I want to, in between, want to have one more question. I think we have five more minutes. One more thing, your foreword in your book is written by Tony Blair, and that's pretty amazing, I think. So how did that happen?
So I met Tony many years ago, in part because he has a foundation that tries to build understanding between people of different religions. And most of the charity work that I've done is in our mission of helping people get along better. So you could see why we would align on that. So I initially met him through that, and we started to do some work together. And at one point he actually said to me, "So what's new with you?" Because we usually talk about him.
Yeah.
And I said I had just written a book and I was trying to get it published, and he asked me, "What is it about?" And I said, "Complex decision making." And we had a good laugh, because he said, I know a thing or two about that. Mm-hmm. And he asked me to send it to him. So I didn't really think much of it, but he called me a couple of weeks later and he said, "I love this. I wish I had it when I was Prime Minister." Wow. And I'm going to write your foreword. And what he said to me is that, you know, life gives us lots of high stakes decisions that come along. And the truth is that you need a decision-making system before you actually need to make a high stakes decision. He said it's like those vitamins that you take or the shots that you get as a kid, right? That when you're in that moment and you're facing down a high stakes decision, you really do want to know that you own the skill set for how to be able to think about it, so that you're not filled with frustration or fear about where to look for information or how to go about it. And so that you can have confidence and conviction that you can solve your problems in a way that have a good chance of succeeding for you.
Yeah, great. I think we should end with this. I love these end words.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, and connect with us via email, via LinkedIn, via Facebook. We're all on it, so connect with us, and we would love to speak to you personally. Thank you.